Thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
How long have you been a Tibetan doctor?
I think I'm going on like 25 years of study. It took me about 10 years to get my full papers and degree and everything.
Mhm.
Um, so I started in 1999,
Oh,
and there was like only two books in English at the time. So been a while.
where did you study?
So I like to say that I did it totally the wrong way, right? So I, at the time, there were only two books in English, so there was no real easy way for me to study. And so I went, well, first I studied with a Western doctor who had studied under Tragora Rinpoche, from the Chagpori lineage. And so I studied under this Western doctor who had studied with him, and he was a family practice GP, and he had sort of dabbled in Tibetan medicine in his family practice for about 20 years at the time, but wasn't fully trained. And so I studied with him for about 2 years. Then I went to Nepal. I did about 6 months in Nepal. Then I came back, wrote my thesis for my undergrad, which included Tibetan medicine. And then I went back to Nepal, back and forth to Nepal quite a few times. And then we were always hosting Tibetan doctors in the local area. And so I basically apprenticed with them. And they mostly all happened to be in the Chakpori lineage as well. And so I would like go with these doctors and sit with them and sort of learn an apprenticeship style. And then it sort of just became really obvious that I needed to go abroad. And my root lama basically ordered me to do so. So that was Kenshin Thrangu Rinpoche. And he basically like ordered me 3 times in one conversation. And so I made plans to go to India and had letters from people who had taught at Chakpori to sort of introduce me. So I moved to Darjeeling after about going on about 3 years of study. And then I spent 2 years in India at the Chagpori Clinic and then also studying Tibetan language. And then I met and married my husband, who's also a Tibetan doctor. He was a pharmacist at Chagpori. And when we were expecting our first child, I really wanted to eat like stuffed grape leaves and have burritos. And he was like, you have to go home. So at that time, Shangshung Institute had opened up its first sort of track for Westerners, which was a 4-year program. It's typically 5 years. So I had studied for about 5.5 years at that point. And so they sort of gave me an exam, let me in halfway through their first cohort. And so I spent my last 2.5 years under Dr. Punsak Wangmo, who was trained from Lhasa Kang. So she initiated all my exams and everything. And then at the end of those final exams, then that qualified us to go to Xining in Amdo, and we went to a medical and do a short internship. So my cohort had been studying at that point for about 4.5 years, but I had been studying for about 10.
Mm,
So it was a long haul. So
yeah,
Nepal, India, Tibet.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. That's cool. So why Tibetan medicine? What attracted you to it, and like maybe explain a little bit because I don't think a lot of people are really familiar with it.
Um, so it's kind of a funny story. I always tell this story. I had been receiving 5 element acupuncture since I was 15 years old. So I always assumed that I would be going to school and becoming a 5 element acupuncturist. And I actually 3 years ago finally just got a master's of that. I took a 20-year detour and I'm in process of studying for the national boards. But so I thought I was going to be an acupuncturist. So I had always been used to someone reading my pulses. And then I didn't go to college right away after high school. I just didn't see the point if I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I lived in Boston and I'm from Colorado, but I moved to Boston and I ended up working in like a kind of Whole Foods type thing. and I was working in the nutrition department, and I discovered that I absolutely loved herbs. And so I sort of fell in love with that. So I went to take my anatomy and physiology prereqs, thinking I would eventually go to acupuncture school, sort of fell in love with the body and anatomy and physiology, and just kind of opened up my whole world to science. So I'm sort of a closet scientist. Um, and then I decided to go to Naropa University because I wanted my blue sky back and my mountains. So I came home to Colorado, enrolled at Naropa, thinking I would then go to the five element school that's just down the road. And my first semester, I took this class with this Western doctor. And I was like, okay, it's kind of weird, kind of Buddhist, like, okay, strange, but all right. So I'll take the second semester. So I took the second semester, and I had originally planned to get a degree in like yoga and then go on to acupuncture school. But the second semester, this physician had invited a monk physician who was a Rinpoche. So a Rinpoche is a reincarnated Lama. And so they remember their previous lives. So he was the fifth incarnation of the same doctor for the past 5 lives. So incredible human being. And so that was my first encounter with a genuine Tibetan doctor. And we all had to bring our urine to class because urinalysis is a very special and sort of unique form of diagnosis that you don't really find in other medicines. I think some kind of know to look at the turbidity or the color, but there are actually 6 times and 9 ways that you might look at urine for diagnostics. So we all had to bring our urine, and I'm working 3 jobs and I'm going to school full time. And this doctor, like, if this was my urine, he like looks at me and he looks at my urine and he looks at me and he looks at my urine, and he just nails it. He's like, you eat too much pasta, you have a lot of anxiety, you don't sleep enough. Like, he just like, he didn't touch me, he didn't read my pulse, he didn't check my tongue. All he did was look at my urine. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. So it was actually urine that got me into Tibetan medicine, like truly, genuinely, because I was like, everybody's an acupuncture. I mean, not everybody, but at the time, 20 years ago, it was relatively unknown. But I was like, nobody's doing this. And to this day, there's really only in full practice, probably between 10 and 12 Tibetan fully trained, actually trained with papers, Tibetan medicine doctors in the United States. So there's not very many of us. There's a lot of sort of Tibetans that are kind of hidden and practicing in their homes and that sort of thing, but not a lot of clinics, like really like under 10. So I just saw that there was this hole and this was this amazing system. And then when I went to abroad to Nepal and I studied for 6 months, I just kept seeing all these amazing things. And I was like, okay, I'm hooked. And so by the time I got in it deep enough to realize that I had to move to a whole country and sort of surrender my life to it, I had already invested so long that it just didn't make sense. I didn't want to be the sort of jack of all trades, master of none. I didn't want to be sort of this kind of, I didn't want to culturally appropriate, essentially. And so I went all in. Yeah. And it took a decade. Yeah.
That's what it takes, though, right?
Well,
Uh,
they say the saying is that after 10 years, you're like a baby doctor,
yeah.
right? And that you kind of have an idea of what's going on. And then kind of around 20 years, you start to feel kind of comfortable. And
Mhm.
I would say, like, as a Western bodied practitioner, it really took me close to 20 years to feel like I was a baby doctor,
Yeah.
like I just, or if you would think of Tibetan medicine as like an ocean of wisdom,
Mhm.
right? Really, truly highly qualified masters who have spent lifetimes sort of engrossed in this, have maybe a couple of bathtubs full or a swimming pool. And then, I'm hoping by the end of my life, I might have a nice sized bucket,
Yeah.
So it does, it's a lifetime of study. So it just continues to get deeper and deeper.
So maybe like why is that? So like other professions don't take this. Like what is it about this that requires that?
I wouldn't say that's true, actually. Having also now studied um, Chinese medicine, you could go
Oh,
into the Neijing
yeah.
endlessly as well, Ayurveda as well. And I would say that's true of Western medicine as well. That's why we call it practicing medicine. No
Mm,
one ever really attains this level of like, I'm an authority. I mean,
right.
I think that we are used to kind of having that perception about doctors, like they're the authority. They have to know what they're doing. And that's all very true, but there's a level of like base knowledge that one has, and then you're constantly needing to be able to make connections. And then from my perspective, working in the West, for me, it takes that long because I'm interfacing with Western biomedicine. And so I'm constantly looking at labs and test results, and I'm, sort of kind of always comparing sort of the new studies of the microbiome to like what we talk about in our chapters on post-digestive taste. And, so it's kind of making these connections. And I think the connections are very important. And the Tibetan medical tantras, we have 4 basic medical tantras, and the book is really only about that big. But if you were to look at commentaries, you could fill a whole library. And that's because everything's sort of nuanced, and everything you actually need is contained within the first um, sort of 6 chapters within that root tantra, if you will. And so you have kind of everything that you need in the root tantra, but it's so condensed and it's so subtle in how it sort of works on a interdependent nature of phenomena level that to really grasp phenomena, you have to constantly sort of unravel this yarn ball and then recoil it and then re-ravel it. And then, you're constantly sort of examining it and seeing how it unfolds and then figuring out where it has its place, if that makes any sense. So I think I think anything that's a full discipline is a lifetime of study, be it Qigong, Tai Chi, um, you know, any form of healing. I mean, that's why doctors in Western medicine have to retake boards because medicine's constantly changing. This is unchanged in the sense that it's thousands of years old, but we're finding things in modern biomedicine that actually were already spoken of, 2000 years ago within classical Tibetan medicine texts. Like, for example, our post-digestive taste is a very complex chapter, and so basically between the like 15th and 17th chapters of the explanatory tantra is really super in-depth for understanding how to treat nutritionally, which is 90% of what we all need to do, because that's the primary thing that is the root disharmony and also the root back to health. And so when you're looking at those post-digestive tastes and you're talking about the organs meeting an energy of an element and having a taste. And then now biomedicine understands that there are gustoreceptors or taste buds actually within the duodenum that they've just discovered. This verifies something that's we've known for thousands of years.
Mm.
So it's kind of fascinating.
So yeah, I wanted to, you're in a good position to do a juxtaposition between West and East or medicine, but then also the 5 elements. I didn't know you had that in your background too, so that's nice. Um, but let me ask you, dig into that a little bit. What is this post-digestive taste? What does that mean?
So yeah, so essentially you have, Western concept of taste is 4 tastes. And Chinese medicine has a concept of 5 tastes, and Tibetan medicine and Ayurveda, as well as sort of Persian medicine, has 6 tastes. I've also studied just a little bit of Persian medicine. Um, and so these tastes are associated with the different elements. So the best example would be like salty, is like fire and water put together. So you eat something, and then it matches the energy of the initial organ that it's encountering. So the first organ that anything encounters is going to be your stomach. Your stomach is associated in Tibetan medicine with pagan. So pagan is associated with earth and water. So that earth and water are going to meet that fire and the water is going to match, but the fire is going to fight a little bit and cause what? It causes it to be a little drier. So it actually gets a little bit more heat going. And then we go to the next phase of digestion, and we have some input from the bile duct and the pancreatic duct, which is not really mentioned in medical texts, but they both dump in the same location. And they give this energy of tipa, of bile, sometimes it's translated as, or fire. And so that is a fire energy. And that fire energy that was left over meets that fire energy and gets even stronger. So then there's more drying happening, right? And then you get into the duodenum, which is primarily associated with what's known as the fire accompanying wind. So you have to be able to move something from a solid state to a molecular state so that when it gets to the duodenum, your system, your gut lumen, can actually absorb those through those tiny microvilli up into the hepatic portal vein, and then that serves as nutrient. So that taste that's gained a little strength all along the way, that salty taste, has created some dryness. And wind has an effect of doing what? It is also a little bit dry, right? So then we know that that salty taste is going to create a little bit of heat. It's going to create a little bit of dryness. And so we can also see how the opposite of that, like earth and water, sweet taste, matches with the stomach, because the nature of the stomach is earth and water. And so it gets really strong. And then the second phase of digestion, the fire comes in, and the fire's like, oh, wow, you're really, really like strong, earth and water, right? If you've got fire, and you've got earth and water kind of surrounding it, right? You've got a fire barrier, you've got a break barrier. So it can't really blaze the way that it might normally. So think about that in terms of your digestive capacity might diminish slightly. And so then by the time it gets to the duodenum, it's pretty heavy. It's got some earth and water quality to it. And so wind is going to have to work really hard to break that down. So when we talk about post-digestive taste, that's a super simplified explanation of it. You could spend like a week just explaining that. But does that make sense how and so now we know by biomedicine and all of the studies of the microbiome that we actually have gustoreceptors, at least I believe I think it's sweet and sour that they have discovered in the intestines.
This is so
So
fascinating. So when you eat, you're thinking about all these things like I need a little more sweet, I need a little more dry, I need a little more salt. You're trying to balance all this all the time with your meals throughout the day.
absolutely. And when I'm meeting a patient and I'm seeing where their elemental composition is, or where it might be an excess or deficiency, or something's off with it, I'm trying to match the diet to be the antidote. So food is medicine and medicine is food, right? We know this. And so, we know that we can match this as like an antidote to sort of ameliorate a lot of the symptoms. So we have 4 methods of healing: diet, behavior, medicine, and accessory therapies. So, diet and behavior are 2 legs of a stool that if a doctor has done their job correctly, you can walk on your own. So I often will say that I feel like I'm a tour guide telling somebody how to pack their suitcase. In winter, carry this. In summer, carry this. Because the external cosmos and the external energies of the 5 elements have an impact on the internal cosmos, right? We know, for example, that the pores kind of close down in the winter so that the internal heat can blaze. And we know that in the West as well. we tend to sweat less, right? So there's just this sort of understanding of how the outer is affecting the inner. And it's that same ball of yarn that we're unwrapping constantly, of like being able to be flexible and change with what's happening outside of us and what's happening inside of us with the different stages of life that we're in. So a child's diet might be very different from a 20-year-old's diet versus like a 50-year-old's versus a 70-year-old's. So,
Yeah, that's such a
yeah.
nice way. So when you're talking, the difference, like, I like the idea of the tour guide because I think that's a little bit lacking sometimes in the Western perspective, unless maybe PT or something like this. But generally, something's being done to you rather than
Mhm.
you're working with. So, I mean, this is more like acupuncture, five elements. Like, there's a sense of like there's a team effort in a way.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, you know your body the best. I may have 25 years of study as a Tibetan doctor, but you wake up in this meat sack every day.
Yeah.
And so I can read the signs and symptoms, and I can understand the experience. And a lot of times when people come to see a Tibetan doctor like me, sometimes they feel like they've been seen for the first time ever, because you're able to make connections to weird things that everyone else just goes, I don't know. I don't know why, but I'm like, oh, that's because of this or because of that. And I can connect all the dots. And that's very reassuring, but it also means that like you're in the driver's seat, right? I'm just explaining to you the situation at hand. This is how your body is presenting. These are the elements imbalanced as I see them. These are the methods that we're going to use to employ elements based inside food and behavior and medicine, or we're going to apply some external therapies. And then that's going to antidote what you have. Right now it's winter, so maybe we're going to need to do stuff differently. We're going to keep this diet. We're going to change that probably in late spring or early summer. You have a heat condition, it's winter, it's not so super easy to get at the root. We have to wait until the end of summer when it's at its peak time to grab it. So there's lots of considerations that we have to have, but it's a very thorough system. I mean, you wouldn't think that if you go to a Tibetan doctor in Asia, because sometimes it's just 15 minutes, it's in and out. And culturally, it's just accepted. Like the doctor is kind of on the level of a lama. Like it's a very respected position where there's not a lot of questions. You just have blind faith. Kind of sounds like something we know here, right? But the difference is that, up until the recent generation, all the Tibetans knew that aged butter was hot, and that they would know that this food does this and that does that. And I remember most recently, last year, I was doing some acupuncture on a retreat master who I'd met a few times. I was staying in a monastery for some time for some ceremonies, and I had known him, and we started talking about wind and the channels and long-term retreat because he's a retreat master. And he was like, oh yeah, there's this woman up in like Manang, and she told me to do this when this happened, and it helped. And it was just kitchen medicine. It's just kitchen spices. And so I literally was like, oh, if you have this, you take this. If this wind is out, you do this. If you do this, you do that. And it's like, it's just very simple. And he could grasp it because he knew all of those spices. He grew up with them. So now here we are with a diaspora of Tibetans who are being raised as Europeans and Westerners and Australians. And so their diet is changing, their culture is changing. And then you have pockets of it where it's sort of inside another culture, inside Tibet, inside Bhutan, inside Nepal. And then you have inside Tibet, where you have some influence there as well. And so, the generation that is up and coming, one of the things that I have said when I've gone and I've lectured at Tibetan medical schools in Asia is you have to have yiche. You have to have faith in your system, because your system genuinely has amazing capacity to match and fight with disease. have to have faith in it in order to really unravel that yarn, to see where it leads, to see what it can do. You have to trust, that you can do this method first, and if it clears up on its own, you don't need to go and see a doctor. So like this RSV virus is going around. It's pretty big right now. So I saw somebody and I said, you are on the edge of pneumonia. I'm giving you really intensive treatment. You are coming back in 5 days. And if you are not better, you're going to get antibiotics, right? You're going to go see a doctor. And they came back and they were better. So, there's a window where you sort of traditional natural healing can really occur. Or, we participated in a study with a cohort of Tibetan doctors in early COVID, in like the early, where it was like, stay home, take your vitamin C, water, and hope you don't die. There was nothing. There was like no idea what to do. And so we're talking like, kind of March through May of 2021, where we were documenting what Tibetan herbs we were giving to test positive COVID patients, and symptom resolution was up to like 4 to 5 days earlier, which is extremely clinically significant, right? But having those kinds of measurements and studies and things are in such infancy in Tibetan medicine that it's kind of unknown. Yeah.
That's cool. So I like, this is I think all the different aspects of these traditions are finding difficult. Like when you're meeting an audience who has no background, this seems overwhelming. Even something like you were saying with the tests and the balancing, like our Western diet's so crazy. We don't even know what foods are in season half the time, most people. So,
Yeah.
are you finding this a big ask? Like, do some patients come in and then leave like, no, I just want a pill or something. Like, how are you finding the receptivity?
Well, I think the people that show up in my office have tried everything, a lot of things, right? Um, so we're completely word of mouth. Um, and so people just know, I don't know how they do it. I don't know how it works. I just do whatever she tells me. I just do whatever he tells me, and I got better. And so they just do it that way. And so they have that yiche, that faith a little bit. And other times it's kind of like, I have to be convinced, right? And so sometimes you just give a very simple, very basic sort of instruction where you are saying like, okay, I want you to avoid tomatoes and anything sour for the next 4 weeks and take this medicine and eat just these basic things. Like you can eat those things, they're not that great for you, but don't have any of this. Come back and tell me if your reflux is better. And they always come back and it's better, right? And so then they go, oh, that was helpful. And what else can I do? And I said, oh, well, then so you're kind of like there's a little bit of a buy-in, and you can kind of suss out what kind of patient you have after having worked with hundreds of patients. You kind of can tell like they're all in, they're going to do everything you say, they've got their notepad, they want to know it, they want to understand it. And then other times you give them the diet sheets and they're like totally overwhelmed, and you're like, okay, listen, I just want you to focus on this and this. I'm going to give you one medicine and I want you to make this tea, and you keep it super simple, and then you have something that they can build on sort of slowly. Um, so it just kind of depends on the patient that you meet. But a lot of times, the people that I'm running into have tried everything. They've done everything. They've seen the acupuncturist. They've gone to the naturopath. They've done the functional medicine doctor, and they're like, "What do you got?" So, and sometimes they're physicians themselves, and so they're just ready.
Oh, that's cool. So okay, if somebody's since you brought up they've gone to an acupuncturist and now they see you, because I think most people, well, what's the difference? what's the difference between these two systems? That's like insane questions. I understand that, but um, just
It depends on the style of acupuncture.
let's go with five
For
elements.
one thing, right? So like classical five,
Yeah,
yeah. So five element, they don't do herbs. They don't do symptoms. They treat basically on the understanding of how to make you the most balance inside yourself
yeah.
so that nature can correct itself,
Oh,
right? Which is extremely elegant,
yeah.
so elegant and lovely, and works on such a deep spiritual based kind of mental, emotional, that then kind of cascades over onto the physical a lot of the time,
Mm,
right? So you like that five element, but they don't do herbs, you know. Most of them are not deeply trained in nutrition. I mean, even I
hmm.
would almost dare to say nutrition isn't really trained in nutrition.
I was gonna say I need to come see you. I wish I had a Tibetan doc. I used to see Tibetan doctors when I was in Nepal and living in India. I saw Dr. Yeshe
Uh-huh.
Lungtrup several times.
Oh, lucky you. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Dr. Nita, and they always give me diet sheets, and then I don't I don't completely follow up. There's some things on there I'm like, I want to keep doing that. So I need somebody I see regularly.
I think the why is really important because if you are told, and this is true in Western medicine too, like, okay, we know if you have hypertension that salt is going to elevate your blood pressure, so go low salt. Okay, A equals B. But we don't really have an A equals B for Tibetan medicine. Unless you're really working with someone who's taking the time to explain things. So, like I said, like in India or Nepal, or in your experience, you'll go in, they'll read your pulse, and they'll be like, no sour, no damp, like whatever, less mango pickle, or you whatever they're gonna tell you, no Coca-Cola, and then off you go, and they've given you these pills, and you don't know what they are, and you're like, okay, and like they work, and you feel better, but you don't really know why. So, in our clinic, we're kind of a different animal. And my husband is a full Tibetan and a Tibetan doctor, but he's sort of learned how to meet Westerners where they're at, which is, Westerners, there's like a joke that I will tell my Tibetan friends. Westerners are all Karijini. Karijini means why.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, yeah.
Why? Why? Yeah. I never really saw a lot of Tibetan children, actually, come to think of it, say why a lot in the same way that our kids do.
That's right.
But I think that it's that buy-in of understanding, like, okay, a banana is like heavy and sweet and dull and sticky. And so you have an imbalance of earth and water, which is heavy and dull and slow digestion and sticky. Don't eat it, right? You have acid reflux. So sour increases heat in your body. So oily, sour, and like tomatoes are very acidic. Cut those out, it's going to help. So like really basic, tiny things, if you can teach. So again, it's like the tour guide. Yeah, this is what you need in your suitcase.
And so many of us need this. And there's something you're asking. So the banana was really interesting because you start to describe this banana, the weight, the sticky. And it's like, how many people though have the mindfulness that they're taking the time to even think about the food they're eating? Like so many people just stuffing their in the face or something that's not, nor natural food even. Um, so I think, like when you say you're talking to the Tibetans, like they're generally more embodied people. They're a slower, more connected than the Western mind typically.
I think traditionally that was true.
Generally,
I
yeah.
think I think generation is changing things. Modern world is changing
Yeah,
things.
sure. I
Uh,
mean, in response though to like how this tradition gave birth, the
yes,
people that gave
100%.
birth to it. Yeah.
100%. My mother-in-law was completely illiterate, but she knew all sorts of little tricks,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
And um, I remember after I gave birth to our first child, she massaged me head to toe with the most disgusting smelling aged butter. And, I slept so good. And every morning she would like bring me like a special drink made from fresh buttermilk. And then in the evening, she would like massage my wind points with the stinky butter and then give me like a tiny little bit of chang and help me to sleep because my wind was so high from having just given birth and not having any sleep because I'm up every 2 hours. She knew. And she didn't study any medical texts, but she knew. Yeah.
See, that's something I find to be so precious, and I see this across disciplines that there's this element of connectedness that's not necessarily intellectual. It's like it doesn't have to be anti-intellectual, but there's another type of knowing that's more direct. Um,
And five element is a lot like that, right? It's about having an awareness of where you are in time and space, the time and space of your inner self, of your own spirit, and what your spirit needs to be nourished. That's just as important as food, right? Is our sort of spiritual nourishment. And, like we're in winter right now and I always get so irritated in December and I take most of December off and I'm still crazy busy. And it's a time to be still. It's a time to be silent. Like I'm waiting for my children to grow and I've got a long ways to go. But once that happens, I can't wait for the day I can take a 3-week retreat around, solstice when you're supposed to be still. But I think that sort of kinetic understanding of what you're doing organically starts to grow when people are working with a Tibetan medicine physician because we need to be able to make a connection to like it can be as simple as people come in and they go, I don't know why, but whenever I eat the things you tell me not to, I feel worse. And when I eat the things you tell me to, I feel better. And I'm like, okay, great. I'm so glad you felt awful when you ate those things because now you know it's in your power, right? And so I think that that's the part of Tibetan medicine that really needs to sort of kind of come out in the West more fully. And it's one of the reasons I'm working on like launching a sort of long-term sort of wellness health consultant certificate so that people can be working with people with diet and behavior, but they're not playing doctor where they shouldn't be, not messing with the herbs because they don't have the training, they're not reading pulses, they're not doing all of that stuff that doctors do, right? But they're understanding the interdependent nature of phenomena when it relates to food and behavior and meditation and external therapies and things that are like very safe but corrective. And I think that is really where medicine in general is lacking. And you ask like, what's the difference between why would somebody go to a naturopath or a Chinese medicine doctor or an Ayurvedic doctor and then come see you at the end? And sometimes it's because there's a little bit of a root. They got all the surface level stuff, but there's a disharmony deeper down that hasn't gotten attended to sometimes. And sometimes that's simply because, um, you know, everything else is very often symptom based. Modern, I'm studying for these national acupuncture boards right now, and it's all symptom based. It's all, tracing and chasing a tail, right? So if you really look at it from the classical perspective, you can totally find a root cause, but the point prescriptions and the things that they're doing, they're all symptom based. They're all chasing just a symptom. And if I look at the points that they're using, they're magnificent points, don't get me wrong, but they have a very limited scope of points that they're using. They're not using a whole plethora of other points that might be used in other systems, like in Japanese or Korean or five element. So it's really, you have a backache, I'm going to do this because this is good for the back,
yeah, yeah.
like, why do you have a backache and how much water are you? I mean, there's some basic things, and most people are doing a very good job at doing that.
Mhm.
But I think it is connecting deeper into people's subconscious system of, how were they raised? What kind of family system did they come from? How did that affect their nervous system? How does that like show up every day in the world? What part of themselves is not coming forward? What part is coming too far forward? It could look 1,000 different ways. And so what does balance look like for each individual person? We can't put people into little categories. Like you're going to be a nice little earth person and you're going to be a nice little fire person. I mean, it doesn't work that,
Yeah, yeah.
right? I mean, great if it did, but it doesn't. So everybody's unique. And so you have to be able to be flexible enough to sort of work with the cosmos in motion, I think.
Mm,
And Tibetan Buddhism in general is really skilled at that.
mm. Okay, let's talk. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. What do you mean by uh, there's something with motion here, and I feel like something else is with it
Mhm.
too.
So, the Buddha states that all things are impermanent and subject to change, right? And so, because of that, homeostasis is not static, right? It's fluctuating, it's moving. So, again, looking at the difference between our 21-year-old selves to, I'm 49. So, that's a very, very different body, even molecularly speaking. So, how do I match the energies of my basic nature of who I am elementally and how I present in the world? What kind of combinations do I carry primarily? And then I have the external forces of like motherhood, stress, like whatever you want to put on top. And then I'm reacting to them alchemically inside myself. And then that's having an effect on the mind. And the mind resides in the heart. And the heart is so associated with spirit, both in classical five element and in Tibetan medicine, right? So the shin or the mind. Um, and so when we learn how to sort of let homeostasis be more fluid and not so caught in our grasping of like, if this will happen, I'll be at ease, I'll have balance. If even if it's like, I'm going to do everything that she says on my list, I'm not going to do anything that she doesn't. I'm going to exercise 3 times a week. I'm going to get in sauna. I'm going to meditate every day. And it's like, if we have kind of attitude, like, awesome, but can you do that in a sort of relaxed way, right? Can we do that in a way that feels like we're participating and we're not just checking something off our list? And so I think when we talk about flux and movement, it's like, you know, I am definitely not an enlightened being, but I've met them, and the reality and suffering and bliss are kind of all the same for them. There's no like wild scale of up and down the way that most of us live and experience life. And that's because they have somehow tapped into that movement of change being inevitable, and that it's like the darkness and the light all exist within the same time frame. And how do we just really apply mindfulness and awareness to what we're eating and how we're speaking and how we're relating, and all of those things do affect our physical health dramatically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like at the core of all this is a kind of relaxed presence.
Mhm.
Checking in, how do I feel? What time of year is it? What's the food around? And there's a time element here where I feel
Mhm.
like the snatch and grab, the food, eat the food, go to the thing, it's like sped up. There's really no hope of, paying attention to what you're putting in your body. You're just not paying attention to your body or the object. You're kind of
Mhm.
taking it for granted. Like you said, there are these boxes of health. And if
Mhm.
I check them, I'm going to be happy and healthy, but it's like this weird hamster wheel. You do it all, and then you're still kind of panicked that there's more to do.
Right. And I run these herbal camps for kids. My youngest is 8, and so I started just running these herbal camps, like day off school camps and a summer camp, like a week-long summer camp, where I take them out, we look at the plants and we talk about it, and I introduce them to the elements, and then I talk to them about their bodies and their organs, and it's like every day we do something different. Like we just did an immune system camp where the kids all learned about like killer T cells and antibodies. Um, and the youngest one that was in it couldn't read or write well, but was drawing superhero capes and on a cell and was like, "Oh, this is my elderberry and it's coming after." And I was like, "Yes." So it's like organically we have that in us. We have that like wonder of connection to nature where I can show a child a plant that's growing that's like a weed and I can say, "Oh, look, this plant does this, and this." And then, their parents will report to me, "Oh, we were out and they um, got into some poison ivy, and then they went and found your plant and they washed it up, chewed it in their mouth, and stuck it on their leg, and it was much better." And I was like, awesome, you know? So it's like we have the opportunity to begin to slow down in general and have a relationship with our earth, with our planet, with nature. And that is why we're in trouble as human beings, because we have lost the interdependent nature of phenomena. We've lost that connection. And so that's why we can say that presence of like understanding that bliss and suffering are the same thing is because those people have slowed down enough to sort of just take it all in without a judgment or reaction. And that's really hard to do when one is suffering. It's really hard to, sort of seek sort of spiritual calm or fulfillment or just basic happiness if you're not feeling good every day. So, the body is a vehicle for enlightenment, but it's really hard to do that when the body is constantly like gnawing at you or shouting at you. And that can be a path in and of itself, but it's nice if we can correct as much as we can so that it's not as much of a bother. I have very chronically long-term ill people with diseases that are incurable, but we can extend their life and make quality of life better. And some of those people are the most relaxed people that I have in my practice because they know, yeah, this is terminal. But I'm living my best life day to day. And it's just beautiful because they're just they're like, yeah, that's progressing a little, but it's not so bad and it's fine, really, because the sunrise was beautiful this morning. I mean, it's fantastic. So I think you can look at it from a lot of different ways.
Yeah, there sounds like there's some sort of acceptance there,
Hmm.
which is nice to settle into something actually and know. Um, well, I think that's brilliant. I love what you're saying here. It's like the connectedness through health and diet. It's like that's like a kind of a no-brainer. That seems like a great way in because you have to eat all day, right? If
Yep.
you got your meditation practice, it's immediate and the effects are immediate. Like that's wonderful versus just
Yep.
sitting down and practicing mindfulness because somebody told you to.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
not
that
saying
never,
don't do the other, but yeah.
yeah. Be mindful now.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, that's great. So I don't quite little esoteric, I think, but not so crazy, I don't think. So in the West, we don't have this idea of channels or of like energy. Um,
Uh-huh.
like the simplified, is it the same as the China? Somebody goes the acupuncture, they say,
No,
oh, meridians and not
not
the,
the same. Not
okay,
the same at all. Totally, completely different. Yeah.
really? Okay.
Yeah. 100% different. There's some overlap that's kind of interesting, but that would be like a whole thing in and of itself.
Yeah.
Um, the simplified version is that how would I'm it's such a large subject. It's kind of like
I
how
know,
do
I apologize.
I you know, the body is basically from the Tibetan medicine perspective, it explains in the 5th chapter of the explanatory tantra how the body comes into formation. So I think that's probably the best place to begin. So for that, I would first need to define what a channel is. So a channel in Chinese medicine is a meridian. In Ayurvedic medicine, it's a like a nadi. In Tibetan medicine, we call it sa. So sa means channel, and there are different types of channels. So we have like white channels and black channels, essentially. So you can think of this in terms of white channels are related to the nervous system. I used to teach anatomy and physiology at a college, and I would call it the central computer and like the accessory computers, right? So the central computer is the brain and the spinal cord, and then you have the accessory or the PNS or the peripheral nervous system, which is kind of outside anything outside of the spinal cord. So we have that, and so there are basically 4 main types of channels in this system. So we have channels of formation, we have channels of existence, we have channels of connection, and then we have channels of longevity. And then we also, sometimes that's translated as channels where the longevity will abide or something like that. So there are huge amounts of commentaries on these, and this, is a huge subject. But essentially, during embryonic formation, we begin to form a body. So, how would I explain it? So, we'll start with the channels of formation. So these 3 sort of form in really gross and subtle body. They extend up and down and from outward from the navel. So it all begins at the navel. And so these channel formations are what are worked with directly with a lot of wind practices. So the first channel forms the brain. And so this is related to what's known as the tsakar, which is a white channel. And this particular channel is known as the sakyangma. Okay. So the sakyangma is associated with the nervous system, and its primary energy relates to earth and water. And so earth and water energies, as some people will translate it as humor or sort of basic nature. I don't really like either of those, because if you break it down into the Buddhist system of the 3 poisons, they match the poison. So earth and water matches delusion, aggression matches fire, and attachment matches wind. So that's sort of a lightning fast synopsis of that. So this earth and water is related to the brain. So it's kind of really heavy in this location of the body. And so this particular channel, the Sakyangma, is associated with the nervous system and earth and water. And it is also related to a lunar pathway, right? So that comes into play later if you're doing certain types of massage along the body with the lunar energy. The second type of channel is the black channel. And this is sometimes translated as Sa Nakpo. Nakpo means black, Sa means channel. So this is the Roma, Sa Roma. And this is located on the right side of the body, whereas the one for earth and water is on the left side of the body. And so this one that's on the right side of the body is particularly associated with Tipa, which is the energy of fire or bile and related to the root poison of aggression. So we've got our kind of, our ignorance over here, and we've got our aggression. And then we have a third channel, which is considered a very primary channel. It's a life channel. It's the life-sustaining channel. So it's the Soksa. And so that is called the Sauma. So U means central. And this particularly relates directly to the energies of Lung, which is related to desire, attachment. And this is the channel that forms during the 6th week of gestation. It starts at the umbilicus and then it just spreads out. Okay. So it spreads out during that 6th week, and it's related to the genitals. And it's also during that time that it's said that that's when the sex of the child is determined. So those are the channels of formation. So that's one category. So you've got those. Some people might be familiar with the alternate nostril breathing techniques. Those work on those channels. And the channels of existence are, there are 4 in this category. And the first one is the Wangpo, how do I translate this? Wangpo Yula Charweta, which this just means that it relates directly to the brain. And it facilitates all of our sense organ functions. So that means that it relates with all 12 cranial nerves. So that's kind of important for that crossover piece. So it relates with our sense faculties, and there are 24 different channels which extend off of that. And then from that go 500 branch channels. So it kind of goes, right? Kind of like your brain. So the second one is called the Drenpe Wangpo Sewetsa. And so that channel is related to the heart and all of the functions of cognition. So the mind resides in the heart in Tibetan medicine. And interestingly enough, in Chinese medicine as well, the heart and the shin and the mind, like if something's wrong with the heart, then the mind is unstable, right? So see that crossover. And then, this second one also has 24 channels, which also extends out in 500 branch channels. So when you see like classical pictures of chakras, kind of think like that, and then the third one is the Luki Pongpo Chakpo Jpartsa, which is this one is relating directly to that navel. And so this one itself is, of course, like very primary in the whole process. And it also contains 24 channels, which extend out and become 500 more branch channels. And so this is just responsible for the whole formation of the entire body, embryologically speaking. The fourth one in the channels of existence in this category is called the Utsa Rigyu Pelwetsa. And so this particular channel is related to the secret place. So the secret sort of root chakra, if you will, or secret chakra. If you ever go to Tibet, you need to go to the bathroom, you ask for the secret place. So this is, of course, associated with reproductive organ and function and genitals, and it allows us to have like satisfaction sexually. Desire function kind of relates with this one. This particular channel, sometimes if there's been like an injury or something, then people lose sensation or erectile function. It's relating primarily with this channel. So then you've got your channels of formation, right? You've got those 3. You've got these channels of existence, and then how are we going to connect them all? And this is where it starts to get a little bit complicated. So If it wasn't complicated already. Is it too much already?
Well, yeah, it's a little, but that's all right. We'll finish up.
Okay. So the channels of connection, essentially imagine that central life force channel, that SOXA, that life sustaining channel that runs from the top of your head to basically about 4 finger widths beneath your navel
Mhm.
is where it runs. So this is your sort of primary life channel. So it's kind of coming off of that original formation channel.
Mhm.
And so from there, you kind of have 3 channels that come out of that itself, as if we didn't already have enough. So you have to understand that at the 6-week mark of gestation, that these 3 that are coming out of that already exist within that. It's kind of like tucked away, if you
Uh,
will.
I see.
Okay. So
Mhm.
here's our central life force channel. And then out of that, I've got 3 that are going to kind of arise. And the first is the black life force channel. And that is directly relating with blood vessels. So this particular one just relates directly with blood vessels. Just think, okay, blood vessels. Okay. So you have the black one, then you have the red life force channel. And this one, it's also kind of like relating to arteries. And that's an interesting distinction, right? Because we know that there's a very big difference between an artery and a vessel. Vessels carry waste, arteries carry nutrient. Except for the hepatic portal vein and the pulmonary veins, it's all garbage in veins, right? It's all the toss away. And this is like, where my mind goes to all sorts of intricate things when I think about qi from a Chinese perspective. And I compare these in my mind sometimes, and I go down a big rabbit hole. So we won't do that. But just imagine that you've got these veins and these arteries. So the black is the veins and the red is the arteries. Okay. And so what's really interesting is that if you look at the text, the red life force channel comes out from what is counted on the Tibetan version as the 13th vertebrae. But this is actually the 12th thoracic vertebrae because Tibetans began to count the vertebrae at C7. And if do any kind of cadaver work or you look at the actual 12th thoracic vertebrae, it's actually the biggest and strongest and has the most sort of happening there. So it's kind of where there's the most sort of blood vessels and everything kind of coming out at that 12th vertebrae, which is very interesting to me because this is relating with the aorta. And then you have that happening and it's the strongest and it's the thickest in the body. So you've got these and then you have sort of this water channel that also arises out at the same time, this sort of white water channel. And the water channel is related with the nerves. So you could also think of, and some people will say that the spinal cord is the SOXA. There's a lot of debate within Tibetan medicine if that's true or not. It kind of makes some interesting sense. But just like in Chinese medicine, if we were to cut the body, we wouldn't necessarily find the Changmai channel. We wouldn't necessarily find those channels, but we know that they're there. We can feel them. We can feel their energy move, that sort of thing. So from that black vessel channel, you've got 24 different channels that arise from that black one. And within that, there's 77. We're not going to break it all down because it's too much. Um, but essentially, there's like an outer and an inner, and some like, for example, the outer relates to feeding and nourishing the skin and the muscles, and the middle to the bone and the bone marrow, and then the inner has like 120 that like end up connecting to all your hollow and vessel organs. So it gets really complicated quickly. So essentially, these channels kind of branch out in that way. And the white channels, these water channels, so they're like an ocean of nerves. So think of like the nerve system itself. And the text actually does describe kind of like capillaries in the blood channels. It's kind of interesting. And but we know that the white channels are said to move the appendages, so we know it's relating to the nervous system. And there's like 19 channels that branch down from the brain and are said to innervate and move all of the appendages, right? And so there are also within that 19, there are 13 inner ones that go directly to the organs. And so, like, we know small intestine and heart, and that's related to wind. And then we know that there's 4 nerves that go to the lung and the large intestine and the gallbladder. And that's for bile and the liver. And the other 4 relate to the spleen and the stomach and the kidney and the urinary bladder, and those relate to earth and water. So it's all kind of interesting and matchy with other systems in that sense. And then there's a third one. Or not a third one, excuse me. There's another one. There's one more nerve out of all of those nerves, and that one goes to the reproductive place, or the samsu, which is like either ovary or seminal vessel, basically. And it's interesting to me that in Chinese medicine, just as like an interesting little side note, that the uterus is considered like the most extraordinary of all of the extraordinary sort of extra organs, even more so than the gallbladder, which usually is like, oh, gallbladder. And that's because it can do this other function. And so I think that's kind of interesting to note as well. But like, again, just like with the sort of blood channels, we have these outer channels and we have these inner channels. So like the outer channels, we know that I think it's 2 water channels go from the brainstem directly to the 7th vertebrae, and that's very important for a very specific reason. And then there are 2 that arise from the hair swirl just around the occiput, like in the back. And it goes also to the 7th vertebrae. And then there are outer that are called the Ratna channels as well. And so they all kind of head there. And the reason that that is interesting is because the 7th vertebrae, which Tibetan medicine counts as the first vertebrae, we don't count the 7. That 7th vertebrae is the master wind point. So it's the general wind point for the whole body. And in Chinese medicine, this is the great hammer point. So it's also like known to spread and move energy throughout the whole body. So, and then the last category, of course, is the channels of longevity. And these relate mostly, again, to the blood channels for circulating the blood, circulating the warmth, circulating the 5 elements throughout the body. This is where they describe that it looks just like the veins on a leaf, and it's relating to the solar energy. And I think it's really sort of talking about capillaries. And then it also talks about directly the real life force channel, which is the aorta. So that's actually called the Partsa. And this is responsible for respiration and all the functions that are performed within that wind element and the wind channel. And then the third one is related to the water channels and the nervous system. And it travels with what's something called the La. And the La sometimes is very grossly mistranslated as soul. So people talk about the Tibetan soul retrieval, but it's actually, I like the word consciousness better because it relates again. Remember how I talked about how that initial energy of the earth and water was in the head and that it was lunar? So that left-hand channel that comes down, here we see it again relating to the water channels and the nervous system from the brain. And the law actually travels from the big toe at the new moon up to the tip of the head at the full moon, and then it goes back down again. And so it travels throughout your whole body. So your consciousness is actually moving with your body, and it moves at an hourly rate, and it moves in a weekly rate, and it moves in a monthly rate. And that's very, very important for when somebody's saying going to have like a surgical procedure done. You would never want to get your knee replaced when your consciousness was hanging out in your knee, for example. Those are calculations that we would do. And that's also kind of why full moon, sometimes everyone's like, at the full moon, because your consciousness is literally sitting on top of your head during that time, because the channel is like at its kind of high point at that point. And so yeah, that's a sort of really shortened version of
Yeah.
the yeah.
Okay, so we have all these channels and they all different types of channels. And then now when you're since you brought up consciousness, it's just are you there's like one consciousness, there's multiple consciousnesses circulating through different times, or there's just because like for us in the West, we're gonna say like this is my consciousness. If somebody even agrees they have a consciousness, unfortunately. But if they say they have kind of, they're this is the consciousness, right? But then you're saying something else is happening.
Yeah, so that gets really super interesting because then you start to look at like some of the Buddhist philosophy for like all ground consciousness
Mm,
versus like other levels of consciousness, which we probably don't have time to go into today. But, when you're talking about consciousness, you can either talk about sort of like the innate consciousness that is like from the Dzogchen point of view of, just kind of relax with that interdependent nature of phenomena, right? Or you can get into the consciousness that is grasping of like me, I, you, they, and that can happen like really quickly. And that kind of all ground consciousness is kind of where disease kind of comes in from
mm,
my point of view,
mm.
my opinion. Um, so yeah, that's a big subject. But essentially, your consciousness remains with you throughout your life, and it goes with you at your death, and it comes back again. So, to even obtain the precious human body, you have to have all five elements, plus, you have to have your karmic propensity propelling you forward. And that karmic propensity is really kind of tied up tightly with your consciousness and what's known as you know, there's two types of tigli. There's like a sort of, finite tigli, which resides in your heart, which is connected with elements. And then there's a sort of like unbreakable, undeniable tigli that's related with your consciousness that goes with you at the time of death. And so your consciousness from that Buddhist perspective comes back again and again and again, lifetime after lifetime, which is why some great masters, like the doctor that was the fifth incarnation of the same doctor, was an amazing doctor because he could just remember all of this. It just kind of naturally came back to them, right? So they already had that innate knowing. And a lot of us, we have other things in previous lives that sort of hook us into our path because we like stumble upon it and it's like, oh yeah, this feels right, right? We all have a sense of when we're doing something right for ourselves. And it doesn't have to be that you have to be a Tibetan Buddhist, like at all. Like, I mean, for some people, it's like being in nature, like going out and taking a walk is where their consciousness is just going to be at the most peace. For other people, it's going to be dance. You think of the whirling dervishes, right? For other people, it's going to be Tai Chi. For other people, it's going to be silent meditation. For other people, it's going to be breath work. So again, the body is a vehicle for enlightenment. You've got all these channels all of these channels, and your consciousness runs through all of these channels. Now,
Mm,
if your consciousness starts to have a little bit of like kind of heavy three root poison interaction where you have some passion, you throw in some aggression, and you have some attachment, and then that's going to kind of like throw a kink here and there, right? If you think about it from the nervous system, let's just say PTSD or trauma, right? That's like a really huge area where we can see that the nervous system, so those white channels have been disrupted and it's having an impact on the physical body. And
mm,
right, so do you remember when I talked about how, this channel that comes from the brain, right? And that this Wangpo Yugel channel that I mentioned in this early channels of existence, right, that governs um, those sense organs and all of the cranial nerve functions. And now we know with Western medicine that we can stimulate the 10th cranial nerve and we can calm down all sorts of trauma, PTSD, inflammation in the intestines, like all sorts of stuff, right? That's really interesting. So what is it in that channel that got kind of like, is it a trauma? Is it a place where we couldn't relax because something intense and shocking was happening to us, and that created kind of a in the channel? And so through time and with breath work and meditation and eating the right foods and all of those kinds of things, can we soften that and we can let that channel kind of flow a little bit more freely so it's not as bound up,
mm,
right? So it could be that we could have some binding in a black channel that's like in the aorta, right? And we're going to have a heart attack. Or, so it has far reaching implications, and your consciousness moves with all of that. We all have innate knowing about what our body's actually doing,
mm,
even if we don't like want to admit it. Like everybody kind of knows,
yeah.
right? That's why animals, humans are these incredible sentient beings with consciousness, but animals know when they're near the end. They
Mm,
know, right?
mm,
They go outside, they like want to be alone, or they want to, be with, I mean, it just depends, right? But they know. So, consciousness, even if it's on a really gross level,
mhm,
and we've put a lot of skandhas and we've put a lot of root poison on top,
mhm,
we still have that inner knowing. It's that inner um, enlightened being that we already are, that we just forgot about, right? The Buddha says, the dust is in your eyes, right? You just need to clear the dust out of your eyes, meaning you just need to, clear that away so you can see that bliss and that suffering are the same. And so, physically, right, if you've got a kink, it's hard to do that because you come across that, your consciousness is hitting it,
mhm,
and from a like Chinese medicine perspective, if you think about the hun, which leaves the liver and travels at night, just like the law can travel outside the body, same principle, right? And it bathes the heart in blood, right? So that the spirit gets a blood bath every night. And it sounds funny, but right, but that blood is that vital force, right? The heart needs it. And it's the same kind of concept. And so um, I think it doesn't matter which system you're working from,
mm,
you're just needing to kind of figure out where the hose is kinked. And then when you unkink that, then everything can relax. And that's the same principle of like working with nature
mm,
so that nature can heal. It's the same idea.
yeah. And how the how would we find out where the kinks are?
Because they're related with specific organs and specific pulses, the tongue, the symptoms, the pulse, the description of someone's experience are all going to be very clear with that. And then when one is working with like a meditation master who can know specifically particular levels where things are getting stuck. Um, I've worked with some high level meditation masters where you can really see where there are no kinks in the hoses, like none running through the channels. And then, but they have a physical form, but yet their mind can still kind of flow through that anyway. And then I've also worked with people who are working with very qualified masters who I know somebody who I treated her for years. Like, she's passed now, but um, she had been a practitioner for like 20 plus years when I met her, when I was a young studying to be a doctor. And she went into a 6-month dark retreat. And when she came out and I read her pulses, she was a different human being. Like, those were not the same pulses. She still had the two major chronic diseases that she had, but her pulses were different. They were different. She had unkinked other things. And so, karmically speaking, you can still have like a chronic disease and still have something that's like moving on the like sort of physical gross realm. But like if you think in terms of, do you know the Shama Tatanka with the elephant that changes colors as he walks along the path? So that's, the elephant is that gross, and then there appears like a tiny rabbit that gets on top of the elephant at some point. That's the subtle. And then as you develop meditative equipoise, the subtle just disappears because there's no differentiation between the subtle and the gross. It's the same. And so that can happen even within the context of a chronic or debilitating or terminal disease. The mind can still be free.
Mm. Yeah, I always wonder about that because if you see like a Tibetan Rinpoche or Lama and they have like some sort of physical illness, I'm always like, well, why don't they just cure that if they could with their mind and the channels? But if you're
You
saying,
know, yeah, they're also demonstrating impermanence, but they can also, they don't have to be separated, right? It's all one experience for them.
mm, yeah,
So it doesn't
so we can't judge
it
by that.
doesn't have
You're saying this other like
no.
Drupon met is doing things and he might be fixing things in the retreat, but then others might choose not to. It's up to them.
Yeah, my Salve Lama, I begged him to live for 100 years, and he kind of chuckled at me once, and he said, "Well, I'll try." I could tell he didn't really want. He's like, you know. Um, and I was actually in retreat when he got sick, and I dreamed of his illness, and I knew.
Mhm.
And um, and he sort of held it together until like Sakadawa, and then he was like, "I'm out." Um, and so I think, yeah, we can't judge that because we are still in this meat sack
Yeah,
that
yeah,
is containing us. But
yeah,
these channels also are also somewhat confining. And
yeah.
then we throw in like thought patterns and skandhas and judgments and desires and wanting it to be a certain way or look a certain way or smell a certain way or whatever it is, whatever we're projecting as reality. We've already stepped outside of reality when we do that. And so these great masters are just living in reality. They're like, I'm in a meat sack. I won't be here forever.
Right,
It's
right,
fine,
right.
we'll just go with it. That's kind of what I think. Sound a little strange, but
No, I don't think so. I think the question's a little strange in a way, but like culturally, it's like we want to fix things, be optimal. We have all this kind of weird grasping stuff, and where this is a whole different paradigm. It's like,
mhm,
why are you grasping at this thing? It's impermanent, whether you go today or next, especially if your mind's already here and you're peaceful. You know,
mhm.
like sometimes the precious human body, we need time to develop these, but once you kind of have that equanimity, then it's like, well, you're kind of good. If the body's ready to go, it's ready to go. What are you fighting for?
Right, because you're going to be back. So, and like in the case of the person that I knew that their pulses had changed, there were many times that they were like, this is really hard. They had horrible chronic pain, toward
Mm,
like debilitating pain. and they refused to take medicine because they wanted their mind to be clear. And um, it was very clear at the time of their death. It was very clear. And I've seen it the other way, in contrast, my father died of pancreatic cancer, and I was basically his death doula. And he finally said, "You have to stop now," because I was kind of keeping him going with some of the things I was doing in combination with the chemo. And it was like pulling from an empty well. Like I could do acupuncture and stuff, and he would get like some energy, and then it would sort of fade back again after a week, and then it was like a couple days, and then it was like just a couple hours. It was like pulling from an empty well. And he knew it and I knew it, and he was like, "You have to stop. You have to let me go." And he said, "I want to read you this passage from the I Ching." And it was like something like, the master is ready to die because he knows that he has had good work done in this life, and he's ready to go to sleep just like someone has after a hard day's work. It was something along those lines. It was much more poetic than that. But he handed that to me and he said, "You have to stop now." And, he wanted me to stop because his mind was so expansive at that point, because his body was so limiting. He just wanted out. And he heavily medicated at his death. But in each part, as the elements dissolved, I was like, "Okay, Dad, you're doing great." I was like, "We're just waiting for fire dissolve. Like, it won't be long." Like, I was whispering in his ear. I was letting him know, and I was like, "You have 45 minutes, head to the top of your head." And he left within that 5 minutes. I mean, he knew. And then I could feel him in the whole house, right? So this whole idea of consciousness being trapped in a body can feel very much like a prison, or it can feel like a temporary abode that allows us to develop our consciousness even further, and imagine that our consciousness could then go out and join everybody else's consciousness, and so that we could all sort of be free. That's the sort of bodhisattva effect, right? Of, may we all be free, or no being is free until we're all free. So that freeing of the consciousness, even though it's circulating through something that's somewhat limited by the five elements.
Wonderful. Well, that was beautiful. Maybe that's a good place to end then. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, this was great. Is there any final things you want to add before you go?
Um, I would just caution people to not um, try and sort of self-diagnose too much about things. Tibetan medicine is starting to sort of explode into the West, and which on one level is awesome. And on another level, it does take years and years and years to sort of develop an understanding of some of these subtleties. So, it's kind of like the Ayurvedic, what's your dosha kind of thing. Don't like, take a test and then decide that's
Yeah.
what you are, and then just go all in on that, because sometimes you can create like a imbalance from that. Sometimes people really go all in and trying to control their wind and their minds, and then they end up with too much earth and water. So
Yeah.
just be careful about, like, be careful both on the sense of don't be self-critical of oneself. Like, everybody has an imbalance, everybody has a root poison, none of them are great. We all have them. But like, just start to kind of play with relating with the seasons and your food. And how do I feel when I eat this? And is there a difference between having a frozen smoothie in the middle of July versus right now it's -20 outside my house, right? I would never have a frozen smoothie. So just, begin to sort of think like, how can I be more in harmony with the nature um, that I see out in the world? And then how can I bring that into my kitchen? And how can I bring that into my life? And how can I bring that into my practice? So that's a whole other subject too. But there's lots on that as well. But just really just be careful to not judge oneself and try and overcorrect.
Yeah.
The middle, the
Yeah.
middle path. Yeah.
Great advice. Thank you.
You're most welcome.
Thank you so much. And I'll hopefully see you next time.
Okay, take care.